let's not waste any time. People have seen the headlines. They want to hear from Kyle and Brian, who have been playing Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Kyle, you have beaten the game. Let's start with you, and then we'll go to Brian.
Yeah.
How is it? Is it everything we hoped it would be? Is it bad?
Will this change my life, Kyle?
Marcus, no. But Alex, it's fantastic. It's so good. It's so freaking good.
Oh,
I
it's a
got
relief.
it. Yeah, I got it on, let's see, I'm trying to think of my timeline, because it's funny because I really want to talk about it a lot, but I don't want to talk about it in depth. I don't want to reveal details from it. Like, we as sort of video game journalist people were sometimes frustrated by how little Nintendo wanted to talk about Tears of the Kingdom. We knew so little going into the game, but it's ultimately a boon for the experience. Like, it does make the game fun to know like so little about it going in, you know?
Yeah.
So I want to make sure people retain that. I want people to have the same sort of similar experience I did, which is like really knowing not very much, but I can give you my evaluative opinion, which is like, I freaking love it. It's such a good game. It's a great follow-up to Breath of the Wild. But yeah, I got it on a Wednesday afternoon, and so that's like Wednesday afternoon, then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 6 days, Monday night at like 4 a.m. I beat it.
Dang.
So like I and it's not like, just to be clear, this isn't because there was some directive from high above that was like, you gotta, my deadline actually was pushed up a little bit compared to the online embargo that a lot of other outlets are probably going to stick to. For, like, I actually had to hit a print deadline, but just because I want to make it clear that like, if we needed to push the review back to the next issue, we would have. Like, it's not, we could have made that decision, but I was like, it's maybe the only game that I would have just like gone all in, like just lost sleep, didn't eat as much as I should have, neglected working out. Like, I stayed up late. I loved it. It's so good. It's so consistent. There's always something to do. My clock on my Switch now, which is now we're looking at about, I don't know, what do you think, Brian? Like 12 days of playing for you and me, I think, something like that. I'm at 70 hours, and I think, like, rough estimate, I've maybe seen like maybe about 70% of the game, something like that. I still have so much left to find and do.
It's so huge.
Yeah. And like, that accounts for like there's like you've got Hyrule again, right? It is essentially the same Hyrule, but they've changed so much, and the way you interact with it feels so different, to the point where like, as I'm playing, I even would think sometimes, I was like, I think them taking Hyrule and adjusting it and changing it may have been more work than if they had just started from scratch. Like, really? I don't know if that's true. I'm not a game developer. Maybe they would look at me like I'm insane if I said something like that. But it's so different that and the way you interact with it is so different that it seems really hard. Like, even just the ascend, right? The ability to sort of go through any ceiling above you. Mm-hmm. I can't even imagine the sort of work that went into making sure that works as well as it does everywhere in the world. Like, it's insane how useful that tool is and how much it changes how you move around. It's nuts, man.
Somewhere out there is a senior programmer that got a very big raise for coming up with that idea and making that possible.
And yeah, and like, one of my biggest fears, going into the game was Ultrahand was scary, right? It was this intimidating thing. Is it too versatile? Is it going to make me playing with Legos too much? And it does a great job of like, it can be if you want it to be. I think when the game comes out, there's going to be a lot of really creative people that do cool things with it. But for me, who's just like enjoying the Zelda adventure and not really interested in building contraptions as much as I am solving puzzles and things like that, it's great. It's very like, lets you interact with it and engage with it as much or as little as you want and still be successful and still just feel really proud of yourself when you make something. Like, there's a lot of things where it's like, I got to get from this sky island to this sky island. There's a pile of materials, figure it out. And it's like, you don't spend so much time with it that it feels ridiculous. But then when you figure it out and you like make some kind of contraption to get you from one sky island to the next, like, it feels great. You just like feel like a freaking genius. And that's like every 10 minutes in this game. You just feel like a super genius all the time.
And it's interesting on that note because I've gone back and watched some of the old trailers because they were so cryptic. The trailers before launch were so cryptic for this game. And I remember when like they first showed off like here are the powers that Link is going to have. I think this was before Aonuma did that gameplay demo describing what all of them were. And there was a sequence where Link was like approaching a group of bokoblins and he had like what looked like a makeshift mech.
Yeah.
You remember that scene?
Yeah.
And I never did anything like that in my gameplay. So it's like you could do some really wild stuff, but if you don't feel compelled to, you don't have to. And that's really the thing that I think is to this mechanic's credit, is that like it gives you the flexibility to do as much as you want, but it also gives you the flexibility to just kind of do what you need to do to get to the next part.
I do have a question for both of you. I was responsible for doing the video version of Ryan's hands-on preview a few weeks back, and a lot of that centered on like building contraptions with the Zonai rockets and the fans and stuff. And I guess I have this worry in my head, like, okay, I've seen all that piece of gameplay has to offer now, and there's not going to be like any sort of like wonder attached to that aspect of the game. Do you feel like does it go further than that, or is it more so just like solving puzzles with that tool set, kind of like what you did in Breath of the Wild?
I mean, there are a ton of different Zonai devices that you did not see in that preview footage.
Oh, good. Okay.
If you're concerned specifically about that, there are like different device dispensers will give you different items. So like this one will give you like these 3 or 4 things. And when you discover it, you can actually look on the map and say, all right, well, I need like fans, for example. You can go and see like, all right, well, is this Zonai device dispenser that's next to me have it? And you can look on the map and it'll tell you like, oh no, it has like these 4, but not fans. So you don't have to worry about that. Like there's tons of different Zonai devices.
There's also, like, you'll run into Zonai devices also that are like, I don't know what the practicality of this is. What does this even do? Like, what is the functionality of that? Cool. And then the brilliance of the design of the game is that it manufactures a puzzle about how to use this item. And then you have that in your head to take other places onward. For like, you know, like I'm not going to give you a specific details, but there's a couple items that I was like, I don't even know what is the point of this. And then you'd find a puzzle that uses it explicitly. And it kind of, and it's that thing I love is that it doesn't tell you how it works. It shows you how it works and makes you figure it out on your own. And I love it for that reason.
Man. Wow. Okay. That makes it feel good.
I have one question. I'm trying, and I've been this whole time listening to you guys, I've been trying to like measure what I want to ask. Cause there's like, I'm trying. Right. Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to keep myself like in the dark more or less, but how well does the game run compared to Breath of the Wild?
It's 30, right? It's not hitting 60. I did occasionally have a little bit of a slowdown. Mostly when I would run into it was when there were a lot of enemies. There weren't really any, because like the problem with Breath of the Wild early on was like there were certain areas that you would go to and just being in there would kind of make it chug a little bit. I didn't really run into that, but I did. That's not to say there's no chugging at all. It happens occasionally, but it's really connected to like, oh, there's like 12 bokoblins nearby. So, and that's it.
I remember I replayed Breath of the Wild about 2 years ago now, and I was surprised by how often it chugged and like how often it was like, oh wow, yeah, like this is definitely like a Switch launch title. They haven't really figured out this console yet. And I think that kind of holds true for Tears of the Kingdom in that like this is a game that is coming out 6 years after this console has come out. And yeah, it's doing some advanced stuff, but it does run better, I believe, than Breath of the Wild, at least in my memory of the 2 playthroughs of Breath of the Wild that I've done, and then this recent playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom. I think that comparatively, Tears of the Kingdom runs a little bit better.
I was going to say, because like, I expect that to maybe chug at points just by nature of the hardware, but I also hoped it would be better across the board since, unlike Breath of the Wild, this was developed only for Switch and didn't have to, you know, it wasn't made to run on last-gen hardware too.
I mean, I did have a fear going into it, which I think everyone does, is that there are a lot of Switch games that you play on Switch where you're like, oh boy, we could really use a refresh on the Switch. You know what I mean? Like, this just feels like crap compared to like what I'm playing elsewhere. And I didn't really feel that way with Tears of the Kingdom. Like, obviously, I still would love a Switch refresh. I'm ready for that. It's time. But during my playtime with Tears of the Kingdom, I never really felt like anything was being held back because of the hardware.
Good. Okay. Because I did feel that in Pokemon. Last November.
Pokemon is a great example of that, where while you're playing that, you're like, this is fun, but man, this Switch is not keeping up here.
Yeah.
Did not feel that way with Tears of the Kingdom.
Okay, good. That makes me feel better. Yeah, Brian, I feel like we haven't let you kind of dive into your overall thoughts yet. Obviously it seems like you like it, but where are you at with it?
I am really having a great time. So I have not quite beaten the game yet. I am currently about 50 hours deep as we're recording this. And I am making kind of like final preparations, I believe, for what I think is going to be kind of like the final stretch. I'm kind of going around and like getting Link stronger and everything to kind of make that final push. That's my current status. But I'm loving it. I think that again, I'm trying, excuse me, because I'm kind of trying to talk around like spoiling anything or like giving away too much information. I think the puzzles and the combat encounters are thoughtfully created and designed. I really enjoy some of the boss battles that are presented this time. I don't think it's a spoiler to say there are boss battles.
Can I ask?
I like them more this time.
Last time they were all kind of like just different versions of Blight Ganon or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Is it better than that this time, or is there more variety? Okay.
Yeah, they are, again, not trying to spoil anything, but they are distinct enemies this time.
Good. Okay. That was something I felt like I was missing from Breath of the Wild. And it was like every time I would get to the end of one of those Guardian, puzzles and get to the end of it, be like, oh, it's just this guy again. But now he has a sword and he dashes around instead of having, whatever. So that's very exciting.
How do you guys feel, again, I don't expect you to spoil or any specifics, but overall about the story? Do you like it better or worse than Breath of the Wild story, or where you guys at with that?
Well, I'll speak to it first because I have seen it to its end. I like it. I like the story a lot. I think there's a good hook early on to like a conceit that kind of like you'll kind of be like, oh, I see what's happening here, and I like this. This is cool. I will say it doesn't sort of get outside of the Zelda box in terms of story necessarily. It doesn't feel like a huge departure of like what every Zelda story ultimately is. But that's not to say it's bad. It's not like I think people are kind of going into it with this expectation of it like evaluating how they tell stories in Zelda, and that's not really what's happening in Tears of the Kingdom. But I really liked it. I think I liked it more than I would say I liked it more than Breath of the Wild. I think I did like the sort of the plot more. I think it's more interesting. Yeah.
Is it told through like is the story more present in Tears of the Kingdom?
Like, is it presented the same way as Breath of the Wild? Oh, is that?
We're looking at some hornets' nests here, I think.
Okay.
What do you think, Brian? What's there to say? I don't know.
It's told in a different way.
Okay.
Like you're not Link going around and finding memories from Link's past and like remembering stuff that has happened in Link's life.
That's my main
like,
question.
Lead up to it.
You're not an amnesiac again. No.
But yeah, there are definitely elements that you are kind of walking up to with these questions that we probably don't want to give too much away.
Okay. And from just like a gameplay and like design, do you guys feel like there's so many like hopes and dreams and just like wild ideas about what you could do in this game? Do you guys feel like overall you were able to satisfy like your wildest like ambitions with this game, or just like your weirdest ideas? I don't want to ask specifically the wildest things you guys made because I don't want to know yet, but do you think you could do stuff
in the way one thing that we should mention, I guess, because I talked about it a fair bit with Brian, is the review score for the game, the review is on GameInformer.com. I gave it a 9.75, right? I didn't go the 10 route, but I did think about it a lot. I considered it, and it ultimately came down to, because I did review Breath of the Wild for Game Informer as well back in, 6 years ago now, and I gave that a 10. because that one felt like this sort of just explosion that was going to ripple through the game industry for years to come. And I feel like that's true. Like I still feel strongly about that 10 to this day. Like that sort of that everyone who, maybe not everyone, but I played that game and I felt like it sort of rewired my brain and how to think about open world games and how to think about Zelda, how to think about the genre and that kind of thing. And Tears of the Kingdom for me, like I didn't have those same like goosebumps of like this is going to change everything, right? Because you are in a familiar place and it's structurally similar to Breath of the Wild. So like it does. I don't think it's going to have that same colossal impact that Breath of the Wild had, but it is just still a phenomenal game. It's a Mario Galaxy to Mario Galaxy 2 situation where it's like Mario Galaxy 2 is this fantastic iteration of Mario Galaxy 1. But when we think about the impact of that specific game in the timeline of video games, we kind of just group them together and say Mario Galaxy, right? I still think in like 5 years we're going to like refer to like Breath of the Wild, right? Now that being said, I do think the big sort of impactful success of Tears of the Kingdom is Ultrahand and like how you use it and what it lets you do. And I've lost the thread of what your question was, Marcus, but I just wanted to highlight that I think like I was scared of Ultrahand in the beginning and now I'm like I really embrace it and love it and use it. And I think it really lets you be creative. It really gives you a lot of player agency in how you solve nearly every puzzle or even combat scenario in the game. And I think that's really cool and interesting. And that's going to be Tears of the Kingdom's legacy is like Ultrahand. Well, remember Ultrahand and how that and what that did to that game. It's huge.
Yeah. Like that was kind of my question, which basically like, is it as, there's like it's not surprisingly limited was what I was worried about.
No,
like you go in, you're like, oh, there's more like walls here than I thought there would be. You know,
no, there's fewer walls maybe, and then like you just the way you jump over those walls is feels completely different because you don't have the runes from the first game. You don't have bombs,
I have to remember. I keep having to remind myself of that.
Yeah, like which is fun because it's like now when you come across a river that you need to cross. You know, instead of going into your well and being like, okay, well, I'll get my freeze, I'll get my ice cubes out and I'll move across. Maybe I'll use my bombs in some way or something. Or like now you have to rethink every encounter in the game like that because it's like, oh, now I have to. Well, what can I do? I guess I could ascend over there, or maybe I use Ultrahand to create something to get across. And it just like I love ultimately that it takes place in Hyrule because it's like you have this familiar setting. But you're looking at it through these new lenses, which are these new runes, and it's really cool and really it's fun to revisit that place with these new abilities.
I don't know what I'm gonna do without bombs because that was like my go-to.
Same, yeah, especially with like some combat scenarios.
I mean, hey, there are bomb flowers that you can can find and put them in your inventory, and then if you need a bomb, like just pull that out.
I would just abuse that thing though. Like,
and it's amazing because you can actually you can fuse the bomb flowers onto your arrows and make bomb arrows, or like any number of things onto your arrows. That's the thing I don't think we've talked enough about is the fuse mechanic, because one of your tips that you'll be able to find on GameInformer.com pretty soon here, Kyle, is that you just should fuse everything. Like you should fuse, like as soon as you get a weapon, you should be looking around at like in your inventory or at like stuff around in the environment that you can fuse to it to increase the attack power. Because I remember early on, I was like, wow, there's like no like good weapons that I'm finding in this game. And then like quickly I was like, oh, because I'm supposed to be using this fuse tool. And like I would turn like a 12 power like claymore into like a 36 power or something by attaching like a rare bokoblin horn or something like that to the end of it. And it's like you are meant to just experiment and break this stuff and add like different element stuff to your weapons and shields and arrows and all kinds of stuff. So fuse is, I think, an underutilized mechanic, at least by me. I'm sure everybody else is gonna dive right in with it, but it's like something that because I've played Breath of the Wild so much, it's like I've had to like remind myself to use these mechanics. I'll be trying to like climb up to a tall thing and I'll be like, wait, idiot, there's a roof or there's a ceiling, like just ascend through it. And it's like I was trying so hard to like figure out how to get through there, and it's like no, all I needed to do is remember that there are different mechanics in this game.
Yeah.
Well, with fuse, I'm sorry. I was going to ask, like, between the both of you, what would you say roughly is like your individual ratios versus like fusing something that wound up being a viable like thing versus fusing stuff that was like useless or like dumb or silly or weird?
That's the thing. The one thing I wanted to piggyback on what Brian is saying is like the big, like, which I didn't really expect going into it, but the big advantage of fuse is it makes literally everything you pick up more valuable.
Right.
Everything. Like everything becomes, because like in the last game, everything you picked up could be put into a recipe, and that was its main value. But now it's like that still exists, and then you could also use it with everything else. But in terms of like my big thing was like I would just fuse weapons to other weapons. Right, like it basically doubles your inventory because it's like, oh, there's 2 swords on the ground. Well, I'm just gonna fuse them together, and then I have like a really long sword. Yeah,
just really this is just make a bigger sword. I'm trying to picture what that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, so like you can fuse like a long stick with like a sword on the end of it, and now you have a long stick with a sword.
Yeah, yeah, and then like the sort of like maybe the one like the few disappointments that you run into early on that kind of I didn't end up experimenting too much with is like, well, what if I put this acorn on this staff? And it's like, well, that gives it like 1 extra attack point, so that might be the one instance, Marcus, where you're kind of like, well, I don't need to like fuse every vegetable to every weapon.
Yeah, I'm trying to wonder like how many duds can I expect?
I mean, there's a lot, because there's just a lot of just stuff that you would generally use for cooking that you can find, but then you can like, the other thing is like, it's almost like a good tip early on is like, don't forget that you can just fuse like everything. Like you can fuse stuff to your weapons that like Zonai devices can be fused to your weapon. And that was something that I didn't even really consider until much later. You can fuse Zonai devices to your shield and make like a proper snowboard, and like some weird stuff like that. It's another one of those instances where it's like, I understand why this game took so long, because they had to account for every sort of combination given its
I would love to see the flow chart for like all the combinations.
That Excel document's got to be ridiculous. Yeah. I also, Brian, I don't know if you do this a lot too. I just like, we'll just fuse 2 shields together. So I just have like a double shield.
Oh no, I have not done that.
No, I do that all. It's like, oh, I'm out of room for shields, but there's one that looks pretty cool on the ground. Well, I'll just fuse it to this other shield I have, and now I got a double shield.
Well, there's one time where like you need to have like a again, talking around spoilers, there's like you need to use water to your advantage, and rather than going into my inventory constantly to like throw a water thing at the stuff that I'm needing to target, I just fused a water Zonai device onto my shield, and every time I needed it, I just brought my shield up and like basically like sprayed water that way. And like it encourages you to think outside the box, and it usually rewards you for making kind of bold decisions. Like that's kind of carried over from Breath of the Wild's exploration, and like now it's just a core conceit of the entire game, really.
It's also oh gosh, I completely forgot what I was going to say. I'm sorry. I'm so excited to talk about Zelda that I completely forgot what I was going to add to Brian's thought.
You need to fuse your thought with his thought.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Jeez.
I remember. Oh, wait. Okay. I remember now, actually. You can organize your inventory by most used.
Oh, that's so helpful.
And I'm curious, and
awesome.
it's going to be fun to see what everyone's list looks like, because it's not like you can manually do it. I don't think you can even pick favorites. You just kind of automatically pick favorites just by the nature of what you're fusing. So like I have bombs really high up my list because I'm always attaching them to arrows, and then like rockets, Zonai rockets I end up using a lot as well. So those are kind of like high up in my list, but it'll be fun to see what everyone's list looks like.
Mine is bright bloom seeds.
Oh yeah, that's well. No
okay,
spoiler, but that's my.
I was gonna say, does it? It's like when it says most used, does it save like a database of everything you've combined? Like once you make it, it's like logged in, so you remember. Like if I find a combination I like, it'll remember that I can do that, so I don't have to, think about it later. Of like, oh, what was that thing I made before that was really helpful? I forgot the 2 things I have to put together to do that.
You know what? I don't think it does. It keeps track of recipes now, so you can reference like meals you've made, which is handy, especially for like potions and stuff. It's like, wait, how do I make the health potion? Okay, right, it's a cricket and this. Okay, but
right.
You know what, Marcus? I don't think it keeps track. I don't think there's a list of things you've combined,
like fuse recipes.
Yeah, I don't think so. But unless I'm missing that, I don't know.
I don't think there is. But there are definite registers of like your combinations in like recipes. It's nice because like now because there's recipe cards, you can like say like you're like, oh, there's this one recipe that I did that like gave me extra attack power, and all I know it involved like using like steak and like a bunch of herbs or whatever. You just go to the steak and hit select for recipe, and it'll bring up all the recipes that you've cooked with that steak, and you can scroll through it and be like, oh, it's this one that uses these 4 other ingredients, and you can select that recipe. And if you have all the ingredients, you'll automatically hold all those ingredients. You can just cook right away. It doesn't make you go through and find all those ingredients.
Oh, okay.
That's cool.
Oh, another really subtle but important quality of life thing is if your inventory is full, if you have all your weapon slots filled out, and you open a chest and there's a weapon in there that you want, in Breath of the Wild, you had to close the chest, get rid of a weapon, and reopen the chest. Now there's just a button where it's like, hey, do you want to drop a weapon to pick this one up? And it takes like
nice.
half a second. And that's like, it's such a small thing to the point where I'm like, this probably should have been patched into Breath of the Wild if we're being honest here. But it is really handy just to have that little quality of life improvement.
No, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Oh,
Good game, you guys. It's so good.
I do have one closing thought, and maybe we get into this in future weeks.
You better talk about it now, Alex, because we're not talking about
ever again. Yeah.
After this, tune in for all things Nintendo tomorrow.
And tell me if we should talk about this later. But can Zelda ever go back to what it was in terms before pre Breath of the Wild?
Ooh.
I think
no physics, systems, and removing the sandbox elements. Could Zelda ever go back to that now?
I could see them doing the Resident Evil approach of like either remaking the old ones like in that style, or like they just have a smaller team that does the top-down stuff, and then another team does the Breath of the Wild big 3D ones, and they kind of alternate. That's like my personal wish list to get the best of both worlds. I do miss. I would love like a Link Between Worlds follow-up or something like that. But I feel like the Capcom blueprint, I don't see them why they couldn't do that if they wanted to.
Yeah, but that's a good question, Alex. I think that main team, right? The A team for Zelda, whoever that would be, I don't know what their title is or what they're called internally. Do you know, Brian, off the top of your head? We just always refer to them as Nintendo.
Yeah,
R&D.
Yeah, R&D or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. The best developers have the most boring names. They're just like, Business Division 3 or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think we will see a more traditional Zelda, right? Like what Mark is saying. I think that will exist in some way. I just don't think it'll be made by that A team. Right. I think like the Link's Awakening team, maybe they're working on another remake or maybe something original that's just meant to be like smaller scale. Like, oh, I'd love that. I think that would be really cool.
I think I was meaning like, would we ever get I'm trying to think of like a more linear 3D Zelda, like a Twilight. Like a Twilight Princess or a Wind Waker where, it's 3D Zelda, but it's just linear and there's no sandbox stuff. I feel like eventually, of course, they can go back to it, but I think
let me Google Zelda series sales to get an answer for you.
I feel like they've shot themselves in the foot with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom because they have just kind of dominated with these two titles.
So Breath of the after Breath of the Wild, the best-selling Zelda, according to this cursory Google search, I believe, is Twilight Princess. And Breath of the Wild sold 3 times as much as that game. So I think we're pretty much locked into to this for the foreseeable future.
I'm not complaining. I just, it was a shower thought I had.
I would be happy with a traditional Zelda. I wouldn't be, if they had, it would be it would be a surprising announcement. If they're like, we're going back to our roots, I'd be like, okay.
I think it would take something to come out and not be like universally loved, right? Like look at like the Assassin's Creed franchise. Like they had Origins and Odyssey and Valhalla, and those were all those huge open area games or open world games. And to the point that I think players were starting to get a little bit overwhelmed, so that it kind of made sense that they would like maybe kind of reevaluate like what they're going to hopefully do and maybe go back to something a little bit smaller scale, right? Because those games were so overwhelming that it actually turned some players off. I don't know if Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom is really that, but like if Nintendo were to maybe like put out a game that wasn't as loved as Breath of the Wild and potentially Tears of the Kingdom, then I think maybe they would reevaluate and maybe look at like going back to the roots of 3D Zelda games. But as long as they're critically acclaimed and selling well and people are all about them, I think that we're going to continue to get this formula for 3D games. And I do think that you're right, Marcus, that we will get 2D games that are more along the lines of like A Link Between Worlds or Link's Awakening.
Cool.
And real quick, before we move on, I do want to correct myself. It looks like Ocarina of Time, if you consider like the 3D version on 3DS and stuff, is the best selling at like about 14 million copies. And Breath of the Wild sold about 31 million copies. So it's still like Breath of the Wild is still sold twice as good as the second best selling Zelda game. So like, I think it's a critical success and a financial success. And I think I just would be curious what would be next. It's like maybe the next one would be a place where they do start from scratch, right? Maybe we do leave Hyrule for whatever the Tears of the Kingdom follow-up is, and we do go somewhere new.
Yeah, we've never gone to space in Zelda. Mario's been to space. Link has to get there too.
We've been to the moon, Marcus. We have been to the moon.
The moon came to us too. Yeah.
Well, Marcus, you've been playing Darkest Dungeon 2, which released in 1.0, I believe, on this past Tuesday. How is it? I guess we should give a primer on what Darkest Dungeon is, but I know like 2 kind of shifts and changes the mold from 1.